My name is Zita Alvarez. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how a single text message at a family lunch unraveled my entire life and rebuilt me into someone they never expected. It happened on a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have felt ordinary, comfortable, maybe even safe. But in that house, safety was an illusion. My husband, David, and I were at his parents' home for lunch. His mother, Agnes, had arranged everything as if we were attending a royal banquet rather than a family meal. The table was long, too long for 6 people, covered with polished silverware and crystal glasses. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the room, but I could barely taste it. That was the thing about dining with my in-laws. It wasn't really about eating. It was about performance. Every smile was rehearsed, every question a test, every silence louder than words. My mother-in-law, Agnes, perched at the head of the table like a queen in exile, elegant, sharp, and merciless. My brother-in-law, Ethan, avoided my eyes like he'd been instructed not to give away a secret. And my husband just ate, as if nothing in the world could break his steady rhythm of fork to plate, plate to mouth. And then my phone buzzed. It wasn't loud, just a soft vibration against my lap under the tablecloth. I glanced down, already preparing to ignore it, but then I saw the words flash across my screen, from an unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. I felt my breath catch. My pulse hammered in my ears, and for a split second I thought I might actually drop my fork. But I didn't. I forced myself to keep smiling, to lift another bite of food to my lips as if nothing had happened. On the surface I was calm. Inside my mind was unraveling. Recording me? Why? My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was some mistake. Maybe the text wasn't even meant for me. But then I caught the faintest flicker of my mother-in-law's smile, stretched just a little too wide, too satisfied. Ethan's eyes darted from his plate to the far corner of the room where a picture frame leaned slightly out of place. A wall socket cover crooked enough to look tampered with. A new vase on the shelf I didn't remember seeing before. They were filming me. But what for? I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't violent or unstable. I was just me. Zita. A wife. A teacher. A woman who had spent years swallowing every passive-aggressive jab Agnes threw at me. Years of pretending not to notice when David stayed silent as his mother painted me as an outsider. I remembered every sting. Like the time Agnes announced at dinner, in front of the whole extended family, some people only marry to escape their own lives. She said it with that same sugar-coated smile. I poured wine for everyone that night, steady hands hiding a crumbling heart. But now there was proof. Proof that something larger was happening. That text message was more than a warning. It was a line drawn in the sand. Someone in that house wanted me to know. Maybe they pitted me. Maybe they were testing me. Either way, they just shifted the game. I kept my head down, nodding along as Agnes asked Ethan about his work. My fork hovered midair while my mind scanned every detail of the room. A flicker of light on the bookshelf. A shadow cast in the wrong direction. I didn't need confirmation. I knew. They were building something against me. A narrative. A trap. And that was when I made a silent vow. Whatever they were planning, I would not be the fool who walked into it blind. I would learn the rules of their game. And then I would burn their rulebook. Because this wasn't just lunch anymore. This was war. I didn't flinch. Not when Agnes accidentally asked me if I was still misplacing my keys like last week. Not when Ethan said he'd heard I'd been stressed lately and did I need help with anything at home. Not even when David glanced at me with that unreadable calm he wore like a mask, the one that once felt like stability but now looked like complicity. I smiled. I cut my chicken. I added more pepper to the potatoes. And all the while that text scrolled like a banner behind my eyes. Don't react. They're recording you. I reacted in the only way that mattered. I watched. When Agnes excused herself to fetch dessert, I followed the reflection of the room in the glass of the china cabinet. Little distortions tell the truth. Literature taught me that, but glass confirmed it. There was a sliver of matte black tucked behind a hydrangea arrangement on the buffet, too sleek to be decor, too new to be Agnes's. I coughed lightly so my chair would scrape and stepped back half a pace, just enough to catch a twinkle of a lens. My skin prickled. Someone had made a shrine of me and lit it with surveillance. I'll help with the plates. I said, cheerful and useless, because Agnes never let anyone help. She waved me away as expected. I collected forks anyway, stacking them neatly, listening for the soft click of the living room clock that arrived 3 seconds late every hour. Clicked now, 3 seconds late, right on time. Something about that steadiness calmed me. If clocks could misbehave on a schedule, so could people. We left a little after 4. The sky sagged with rain that hadn't quite decided to fall. David drove in silence. He picked at his thumb, a nervous habit he had before trials and difficult family conversations. "That went well," he said finally. "It did," I said. "You were quiet." "So were you." He nodded like we were both confirming a fact on a form. On the passenger side window, the neighborhood smeared past in mild colors. Lawns, mailboxes, a child's bicycle toppled on a driveway as if someone had been interrupted mid-joy. The car smelled faintly of Agnes's lavender, which clung to David's suit after her perfumed hug. At home, my first instinct was to run a bath and pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. My second instinct was to tear the house apart. I chose neither. I made tea. I asked David about his caseload. I watched him loosen his tie and roll his sleeves and ask me about parent emails from school. He didn't look like a man who'd planted cameras. He looked like the man I married. That was the most dangerous thing about him. He fell asleep early, the slow, heavy breathing of someone who believes in their own innocence. I lay beside him counting his breaths until the number was an incantation. When the rhythm held steady, I slid from the bed and padded down the hallway on the edges of my feet, the way I did as a child sneaking midnight cereal. The house at night is a memory machine. Every object insists you remember where you bought it and why. The sofa from the moving day sale. The lamp we argued about. The framed photo of us on the coast that suddenly looked staged. David's office door was almost closed. Almost as where secrets live. I nudged it with 2 fingers and let the room breathe me in. The desk lamp had been left on, warm and yellow, and the fan in his desktop whispered. I didn't want to feel like a thief, but I did, and it didn't matter. I sat. My reflection in the black monitor was a stranger, wide-eyed, mouth set. I pressed the spacebar. The screen woke with the blue-white rush of light. I wasn't prepared for what appeared first. My own face, frozen mid-blink in a paused video thumbnail on the desktop. Beneath it, a folder pulsed faintly as if it had a heartbeat. Backup _ my initials. Not even the courtesy of disguise. I opened it. I wish I could say I hesitated. I didn't. I clicked like I was flicking on a light in a dark stairwell. Rows of files filled the window, a grid of small horrors name stamped with numb precision. Kitchen_0713.mov. Bedroom _0705.mov. Bathroom _0625.mov. Living room _0702.mov. Dates like fingerprints. Each file a room in a house that had quietly shifted from home to evidence locker. The first one I opened was the living room. The video unrolled in perfect clarity. There I was, legs tucked under me, talking softly on the phone. I could hear my voice through the office speakers, stripped of the protective echo of the room where I'd said those words. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this house, I was saying, and then I laughed, that little laugh I use when I want to make pain sound polite. I feel like I'm being watched. I had been. I paused the video and pressed my palm flat to the desk because my body felt like a kite in a wind I couldn't see. The next file slid open. The kitchen, me washing a mug, setting it on the rack, wiping the counter in the slow circles I make when I'm tired. Harmless. Ordinary. But the angle, low, discreet, made my movements look furtive, guilty. With the right cuts, the right soundtrack, they could make me look like anything. I clicked through file after file and felt my face resurface old expressions like shells at low tide. Angry, exhausted, grief-struck, silly. In one, I argued with David about a late pickup. In another, I cried into a dish towel after a difficult day at school. Then the file names changed from rooms to codes. BTR_0625.mov. MB_0705.mov. I opened one and made a sound I didn't recognize as mine. It was the bathroom. I moved through the frame unaware of my status as a subject. There was nothing salacious, not in the way people mean when they say that word, but it was intimate in a way that felt like a hand inside my chest. Privacy is a fragile country. Once invaded, it's never the same map. I would have closed the folder and carried my shame back to bed if not for a detail that snagged the eye of the teacher in me, the woman who grades timelines and notices mismatched shoes. In living room _0701 MOV, I was wearing the blue cardigan with the snagged cuff I'd bought on a Tuesday. In kitchen _0628 MOV, I was also wearing that blue cardigan, but I hadn't owned it yet. The timeline was wrong. The story was being rearranged. They weren't just recording. They were editing. I scrolled to the bottom of the folder. There were subfolders labeled cuts, drafts, final. My name repeated on files like a chorus. Zita _argues_final.mov. Zita _breakdown_cut2.mov. The naming wasn't clinical. It was gleeful. Whoever did this wasn't archiving. They were producing. I clicked one of the finals and watched a tidy montage of me stitched to look disoriented and hysterical, voice clipped and spliced so my sentences contradicted themselves. The color grading was slightly colder. The music bed, low thrumming, gave the whole thing the sheen of a crime show. I stopped the playback not because I couldn't stand to see it, but because I suddenly understood why. The tapes weren't just a safety net in case they wanted to gaslight me. They were ammunition for a larger war: custody, reputation, property. I saw the way an edited cry could become the proof of instability. How a clipped sentence could become a diagnosis. If Agnes and David wanted me erased from their family with a court stamp, this was the dossier. I felt rage, but it wasn't hot. It was surgical. A clean line drawn across a body of trust where a scalpel separates truth from tumor. I pulled the drawer where David kept external drives. 2 were empty. 1 wasn't. I plugged it in and transferred everything, every file, every cut, every piece of metadata I could collect. While the progress bar crept forward like a stubborn inchworm, I opened a new email account on a browser I downloaded to a portable disk. I compressed the files and sent them to myself, then to an encrypted cloud I'd once used when my students collaborated on sensitive essays. I was grateful for a lifetime of saving drafts in triplicate. When the transfer finished, I scanned for software used to connect to cameras, brand names, default passwords, IP addresses. There they were in a little text file, innocently titled home_network_txt. The last login was hours ago. Whose? Not mine. I used my phone to photograph the screen and sent the picture to the new email. Then I deleted the recent files list and powered the computer down. Even in his sleep, David shifted, like he could sense the temperature change in the house. Back in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan and counted the seconds between the wobble and the click, between future and future. When morning hazed in, I wrote to the principal and requested a medical leave for acute stress. It wasn't a lie. He approved it in a voice that made me realize good men still exist, just not under my roof. I didn't stay home. I packed my laptop in the drive and walked to the public library 2 neighborhoods over, where the air smelled like old paper and resolve. I picked a table near the reference section beneath a portrait of a woman librarian whose eyes encouraged rebellion. I watched each file in full, making notes as though I were writing a thesis titled How to Manufacture a Monster and Call Her Wife. I matched timestamps to receipts on my bank app, to my school emails, to a photograph of a student bulletin board dated in the background. Patterns emerged. Cuts reappeared. Certain phrases returned like dings in a bell. Are you okay? You seem confused. You keep forgetting. Each delivered by Agnes or David with uncanny regularity, as if a script had been emailed out and revised. 3 hours in, I stopped pretending I was a one-woman army and called a law firm I bookmarked months ago, but never thought I'd need. One that specialized in surveillance, coercive control, and harassment. The receptionist's voice was kind. The associate who called me back sounded like a violin string, focused and alive. Bring what you have, she said. Bring everything. We'll sort it properly. Her name was Mara. She didn't flinch while I played the videos. At one point she paused a frame and rewound it, then rewound again. They crossed into criminal conduct the second they put anything in the bathroom or bedroom, she said. They crossed into malicious defamation the second they edited. She asked me to forward the files to a secure server and to hand over the drive. I did, she said. We'll request a forensic review. And one more thing, your son. Jackson, I said, and my voice thinned on the name. How old? 8. Then we move now. She outlined steps like a general. Emergency petition to suspend the grandmother's contact if we had evidence of manipulation, restraining order petitions, a court order to remove any devices from my residence, and a request to bar David from the home until an evidentiary hearing. Most judges are slow until a child is involved, she said. A child changes tempo. When I left Mara's office, the sky finally decided on rain. It came down clean like a wash after a bad dream. I stood under it for a foolish minute and let it hit my face because it felt like the only honest thing that had touched me in weeks. At home, David was waiting in the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee and a neat stack of papers. I thought we could go over this week's schedule, he said, like we were still the version of ourselves who strategized dinners and carpooling. Sure, I said. The coffee smelled normal. The papers looked normal. I was the only abnormal thing in the room. The woman who knew the angle of the cameras, the size of the folder with her name on it, the precise time her husband logged into a software labeled HomeWatch. He watched me drink. I took a small sip and set the mug down. You okay? He asked gently. Are you? I said, and even I couldn't tell if it was a question or a warning. That night, a note fell out of Jackson's backpack when I shook out crumbs at the table. It was folded once, then again, careful hands making a secret of the page. I unfolded it. Inside, in tidy cursive, were 5 words that made the house tilt. You need to leave. Now. On the bottom corner, a tiny flourish, a kind of signature disguised as a doodle. A looped A, the way Agnes wrote her grocery lists. My mouth went dry. Whether it was written by her or someone mimicking her hand, the message was the same as the text at lunch. Someone inside the fortress had begun to whisper. I walked down the hall to Jackson's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He was awake, staring at the ceiling where the glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck there last winter still faintly held their light. I stroked his hair. Buddy, I said softly, has Grandma said anything strange lately? Anything about Mommy? He didn't look at me. He looked at the door. Then he whispered. Grandma said you might have to go away if you don't get better. He swallowed. Are you sick, Mommy? I lied to him for the first time that mattered. No, I said. I am not sick. When he fell asleep, his lashes were clumped by tears. I sat on the floor and let a new kind of rage take my bones, the kind reserved for those who weaponize a child's heartbeat. It was the moment humiliation mutated into resolve. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was building a shelter. The next morning, I took the note to Mara. We add this, she said. We move the court. We protect the boy. Her jaw set in a line I trusted. They think they're making a story. Let's give the judge the truth. On my way out of her office, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was as stark as a road sign. Don't trust anyone today. Then a second message. They're already editing the next scene. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked into the rain without an umbrella. I had my own edit to make, and for once it would not be theirs. I went home and made a list at the kitchen table while the house hummed with its normal lies. At the top I wrote a sentence that felt like a promise. If they are filming, I will film louder. At the bottom I wrote the thing I hadn't let myself confess, not even to Mara. Somewhere in this story, there was a chapter where I was not just a teacher with documentation and rage. There was a chapter where the part of my life I never discussed, the inheritance I never touched because I wanted to prove I could build without it, the connections I'd refused to call in because I believed in love over leverage, would finally matter. I would not lead with power. I would end with it. I pressed my hand flat over the list as if to seal it. Then I stood, breathed, and began arranging my own cameras in plain sight. Body cam in a delicate brooch, phone on continuous record, a small recorder in the pocket of my cardigan. If they wanted performance, I would give them theater. If they wanted a finale, I would build a stage. As twilight slid into the house, David walked in from the garage and stopped short when he saw me sitting in the living room with the lamp on, the same lamp that had once watched me cry. You okay? He said again, a phrase that had started to sound less like care and more like code. I smiled the real kind for the first time in days. I will be, I said. And for the first time I believed it. The following night, when the whole house slept and the storm had finally emptied itself of rain, I went back into David's office to check the folder one last time. A new subfolder had appeared. Time-stamped an hour earlier. Birthday Anderson. Inside were still images of our dining room, annotated in red. Camera angles. Seating chart. A note. When she raises her voice clip. My name was highlighted. Jackson's chair had a star beside it. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I took a picture of the screen and sent it to Mara. Then I closed the door gently and in the silent hallway, planned my own party. I called it my birthday dinner because that's what they wanted to celebrate. The day they thought they could make me disappear. What they didn't know was that birthdays are also beginnings. The decision to host the dinner came to me in the quietest of moments, when the house was still and even the walls seemed to hold their breath. I sat at the kitchen table with nothing but a pen, a notebook, and the hum of the refrigerator behind me. On one side of the page I wrote their plan, their seating chart, their annotated notes, their malicious instructions about when I might raise my voice and how they would clip it. On the other side I began sketching mine. If they wanted a performance I would give them a play. Only this time the audience wouldn't be fooled, and the actors would be revealed for what they really were. It wasn't an easy choice. Part of me wanted to scream into David's face right there in our living room, to rip the truth from the shadows and force him to admit everything. But that would have been exactly what they were waiting for. An outburst. Proof that I was unstable. A crack they could slip through in court and widen until it consumed me. No, I couldn't give them that. I had to wait. I had to be patient. I had to strike when the lights were brightest. The next morning I called Mara. Her voice was sharp, alert, as though she had been waiting for my call. I told her about the new folder, the birthday plan, the annotated photographs of my dining room. She didn't gasp or falter. She just said, "Good. They're documenting their own conspiracy. This makes our job easier." But easy wasn't the word I would use. Every day felt like walking barefoot across glass. I woke up with a smile for Jackson, packed his lunch, braided his hair when he asked me to, walked him to the bus stop and waved like any other mother. Then I went back inside, checked every corner of the house for new cameras, and cataloged every suspicious movement. David grew more careful too. He stopped leaving his computer unattended. He locked drawers he never used to lock. He began making calls late at night, his voice a low hum in the garage where he thought I couldn't hear. I heard enough. Words like custody, evaluation, and grounds. They were preparing the narrative of a mother who had lost her grip. And if I didn't act, they might succeed. So I played along. I sent invitations to my so-called birthday dinner. Handwritten cards, the kind Agnes loved, delivered in envelopes with embossed edges. I wrote, "A night of family, reconciliation, and togetherness." I even signed with a little heart. Every reply was sickeningly sweet. "Of course we'll be there. What a wonderful idea. We'll bring dessert." The hypocrisy tasted bitter, but it also gave me fuel. If they wanted reconciliation, I'd give them revelation. Still, there was one thing gnawing at me: the anonymous messages. Someone had warned me twice now. Once at the lunch, once in the note inside Jackson's backpack. Don't react. Don't trust anyone. They're going to use the boy. Whoever it was, they were either my only ally or my cleverest enemy. I couldn't tell which. One evening, after putting Jackson to bed, I sat in the living room with the recorder in my lap and whispered into it as though confessing to a diary. "If you're listening," I said. "If you're watching me, then you know I know. You know what they're doing. If you really want to help me, if you really mean it, then show yourself. Because I can't fight this battle alone." I replayed the words once, then tucked the recorder inside the lamp where I had found the hidden camera. If my watcher was still monitoring, they'd hear me. Maybe that was reckless. Maybe it was desperate. But I was done pretending I wasn't trapped in a cage. The following day, while grading papers at the library, my phone buzzed with another unknown message. "You're stronger than they think. Don't stop. The walls are thinner than you know." I stared at the words until my eyes blurred. Stronger than they think. Maybe. But I wasn't sure I was stronger than what was coming. 2 nights later, the first attack came. It was just after midnight when I heard the scrape. A slow, deliberate sound against metal. I crept to the window, my heart pounding. The garage light caught a silhouette, broad shoulders, a black coat. The figure leaned down, moving along the side of my car. Then the sharp squeal of metal on metal, again and again, like someone dragging keys with purpose. My breath caught as I realized what they were doing. By morning, the words were there, painted in crude white letters across the car doors: crazy, monster, bad mom. Jackson saw it before I did. He froze on the sidewalk, his small body stiff, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Mommy, who did this?" he asked. I knelt beside him, forcing my voice into something gentle. "Someone who's very sad, sweetheart. But it doesn't mean anything about us." Inside, though, I was boiling. I knew exactly who it was. Agnes. I filed a police report. They shook their heads, said without cameras on the street it would be hard to prove. But I had been ready. I had installed a micro camera pointing directly at the garage. That night I reviewed the footage. The silhouette wasn't vague anymore. It was Agnes herself, hunched in her black coat, her face twisted with fury as she scrawled her venom across my car. When Mara saw the footage, she smiled with grim satisfaction. "This is enough. Now we can request a restraining order." It was the first real victory. But victories like that don't come without consequences. The very next night, Agnes showed up at my door, her voice shrill and venomous, screaming from the sidewalk like a banshee. "What did you do, you ungrateful brat? You think you can take my grandson away from me? You'll regret this." Her fists pounded against the gate, and her words pierced the night. Jackson cried and ran to the backyard, his hands over his ears. I closed the door calmly, even though my hands trembled. Inside, I leaned against the wall and told myself over and over, "This is just the beginning." And I was right. Because the following day, as I picked Jackson up from school, he slipped a folded paper into my hand when no one was looking. "A kid in my class said to give this to you," he whispered. It wasn't from a kid. I knew that before I unfolded it. Inside, in the same cursive as before, were the words, "You don't understand. It's bigger than her. Don't trust anyone today." I folded it back slowly, my breath shallow, my mind racing. It was no longer just Agnes. The game was wider, deeper, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. And I was running out of time. The second note felt like a key slid under a locked door. "It's bigger than her. Don't trust anyone today." I tucked it into my wallet next to Jackson's school picture, and walked out of the building with my head high and my stomach tight, like a soldier smiling while listening for the sniper. At home, the rain had rinsed the driveway clean, but I could still see the chalk of their words on my car as if insult had soaked into the metal. I stood there longer than I meant to, letting the silence become a kind of decision. If it was bigger than Agnes, then the camera in the hydrangeas was only one eye of a creature with many. The restraint order Mara filed against Agnes had teeth. We'd know in a day or two whether a judge would let those teeth bite. But the rest of it, the edits, the folder labeled with my initials, the annotated seating chart that turned my dining room into a stage, none of that began with a grandmother who loved scandal more than truth. It began with someone who knew procedure. Someone who understood the rhythm of courtrooms. That night, David came home early. The garage door thumped like a bass drum, and then there he was in the kitchen, tie loosened, hair damp with mist, the shape of the man I once adored. He set his keys down next to the bowl where we kept spare change and Jackson's small treasures. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay," I said, because there is no word heavier and more useless. He hovered by the island, hands on the stone as if the counter might steady him. "This, whatever you're doing, it's tearing my family apart." "Your mother keyed my car," I said evenly. "She screamed at our home until Jackson cried. She told him I might have to go away." His jaw twitched. "You have no proof she told him that." "I have Jackson," I said, and even speaking his name put air in my lungs. "And I have video of her scratching slurs into my car. Do you want to see it?" He didn't answer. He looked toward the hallway, toward the office he now locked. "You're escalating. You know what that looks like to a judge? You file for orders, you start acting paranoid, you." "I start acting paranoid?" I couldn't help the little laugh that broke out of me. That sounded like a diamond catching and slipping from a glove. "David, someone installed cameras in our bathroom." He swallowed hard, and for a fleeting second, I watched something true flicker across his face, shame. It vanished so quickly that if I hadn't trained myself to read tremors between words, I might have missed it. "No one's saying that's okay," he said, and the plural told the truth he wouldn't. "No one's saying. We're saying. But you've been fragile lately." There it was. The word. The one that turns any woman into a case study. Fragile, as if I might shatter and cut everyone who tried to hold me. I'm not fragile, I said. I'm awake. He breathed out through his nose. Please, he said softly, and had we been 5 years younger and honest, I might have rested my forehead against his chest and let the softness carry us both. Don't make this harder. You mean don't make it harder for you? I stepped around him, picked up the notes I'd been making at the table, dates, times, the crosshatch of a plan. We're having the dinner on Saturday, I said. Everyone's invited. Reconciliation, remember? He blinked, and the part of him that could still perform affection smiled. You're sure you want to do that? In the middle of everything. I met his eyes and let mine be the mirror he couldn't control. Especially in the middle of everything. After he went to bed, his footsteps brushing the floor like a soft confession, I sat on the rug with the lamp dimmed to a halo and called Mara. He's preparing to frame me, I said. He thinks I'm escalating. He'll say you're harassing his mother and alienating the child, she said calmly, already anticipating moves 6 spaces ahead. Which is why I've already filed for the emergency suspension of her contact. I attached your video in the backpack note. Judges move slow. Until someone hurts a car or a child. Tomorrow morning we'll know. I didn't sleep so much as I lay still and rehearsed silence. The next day the court order came through, short, clinical, holy. Agnes was to have no contact with Jackson until hearing. I sat at the kitchen table with the paper under my palms, and let gratitude be a quiet animal in my chest. Not triumph. Not yet. Gratitude is less noisy, more durable. At noon Agnes arrived anyway, because paper means nothing to those who believe they are the law. She stood at the end of our short walkway, gold brooch bright against her coat, and called me a viper, a thief, a poor girl who had married up on a lie. She shouted loud enough that a jogger slowed and pretended to tie his shoe to listen. I shut the door and leaned against it, and for a heartbeat I saw myself from one of their cameras, the villain after all. And then Jackson cried from the back of the house, and my spine remembered what it is to stand. When the police came, they took statements and left with the formal politeness of men who would rather break up bar fights than tell a woman in pearls to go home. Agnes glared at me like I had stolen her face and was wearing it. You can't keep him from me, she hissed, and I thought of snakes shedding skin. He's ours. Ours. Not mine, not his own, but ours, as if love of a boy could be carved into property lines. He is his, I said, and you will not use him like a pawn on your crocheted board. That night, David didn't come home until late. He smelled like cedar and some other woman's perfume, and I hated myself for cataloging scents like clues. He passed me on the stairs without meeting my eyes. You won, he muttered. Happy. I won a piece of paper that says your mother can't hurt our son for a week, I said. Happiness isn't in the room. He slept in the guest room. I sat on the floor of the hallway, back to the wall, knees to my chest, and told myself this posture was not defeat. It was the coil before a strike. The following afternoon, while Jackson built a city of blocks on the carpet and narrated its traffic laws to his stuffed fox, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Don't trust anyone today, not even the ones who smile. I stared at the text and then at the window, as if I might catch the breath that had fogged the pain. I typed back before my fear could argue. Who are you? 3 dots. Disappeared. 3 dots again. Someone who owes you nothing but the truth. A few hours later, because fate prefers theatrical timing, the doorbell rang and David's sister Lena stood on the porch with no lipstick and the kind of hollow around the eyes that only comes from sleeping next to guilt. Lena had always been the quiet one, the ghost at family dinners who cleared plates and changed the subject when Agnes sharpened hers. She and I had shared polite texts about recipes and teachers' strikes. Nothing deep enough to be called loyalty. She wrung her hands now like she had just washed them in her own conscience. Do you have a minute? She asked. I almost said no. The text pulsed in my pocket. Don't trust anyone today. But there was something about the way she looked at the threshold, as if cross it and she would be someone else, that made me tilt my head and gesture her in. We sat at the table. Jackson's fox watched from the couch, a witness with stitched eyes. Lena didn't reach for water. She didn't preface. She slid a folded email across the wood like a confession at an altar. I can't keep this, she said. I can't be part of it anymore. At the top of the printout, its neat font clean as a knife, was the subject line. Plan for if Zita snaps. The sender Agnes. The recipients. David, Ethan, and one more address at a firm I recognized even before my throat closed around the name. Sutcliffe and Ward, the partner-heavy firm where David's mentor had once toasted us with a smile that cost $1,000 a tooth. The email read like a production memo. Install cameras here and here. Avoid sealing corners too obvious. Phrases to use. Are you okay? You seem confused. You keep forgetting. Provoke without cursing. Do not touch the child on camera. Clip points. Raised voice tears any mention of feeling watched. Suggested timeline. Gather for 3 months. Escalate concerns. Propose evaluation. My hand shook so badly the paper blurred. How long have you had this? Since last year, Lena whispered. She forwarded everything to the family thread. I muted it. I didn't think she'd actually do it, but then when she did, I told myself she wouldn't go too far and then the car and Jackson. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth. I can't fix what I didn't stop, but I can stop it now. From her purse she took a small flash drive and set it on the table between us like an egg that might hatch. There's more. Drafts. Voice memos. A list of women your husband's firm has helped. Not officially. Quietly. I'm probably ruining my relationship with my mother forever. She looked at me with a rawness I hadn't known lived in her. If there's a God, she'll survive it. I closed my fingers around the drive. It was cool smooth. Proof often feels like nothing at all until you watch it burn through a life. Thank you, I said, and meant the syllables to be both absolution and a boundary. If you need to stay out of it, if you need your name nowhere near mine, say it now. Keep me out of it. She breathed, relief and grief braided together. I'm not brave like you. I didn't correct her. The bravest people are often the ones who hand you the match and then step back into their smallness to survive. Within the hour, Mara had the email and a copy of the drive. She called me from her office with a laugh so low it was almost a growl. They planned the provocation in writing, she said. And they CC'd a partner at Sutcliffe and Ward. I'm going to file a motion so aggressive it will make their coffee curdle. Will it be enough? I asked, hating the small whine in the question. It's more than enough, she said, steel ringing. We're adding attempted judicial fraud to the stack. Illegal surveillance, defamation, stalking, coercive control. And we're naming the firm. If the partner so much as glanced at that email, he's part of it. I imagined a neat office with framed degrees. A man in his 60s who believed his wisdom exempted him from consequence. I pictured him reading Agnes's bullet points and thinking not this is barbaric, but this is sloppy. My rage found a new artery. Zita, Mara said softly, tuning to some frequency in my breath. We're going to do this in the right order. Law first. Then exposure. When we go public, I want them so pinned to the wall by process that there's nowhere to run. Saturday, I said. The dinner. Saturday, she echoed. Invite them all. Keep smiling. And make sure Jackson's nowhere near that room. I booked Jackson a weekend at his best friend Theo's house, complete with a fort in the living room and pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Theo's mother texted me a string of hearts and said, "We've got him. Don't you worry." I folded over the edge of my kitchen counter and cried into a dish towel for exactly 15 seconds. Long enough to let my body know the truth, not long enough to feed the cameras. Then I stood up, rinsed the towel, and called an AV technician whose name I pulled from the same part of my life I had kept in a locked drawer. The network I hadn't used because I'd wanted a normal marriage more than I'd wanted to win. His name was Gil. He didn't ask questions that would force me to lie. 2 projectors, he said. Backup files on 2 separate laptops. Hot swappable cables. A switch in your hand. And a power bar they can't cut without killing the lights. You've done this before, I said. Not for this, he said carefully. But I hate bullies. And I don't mind charging them to watch themselves. We met at the rental venue. A small hall at the edge of the park with chandeliers that tried too hard. I walked the perimeter with him, feeling the room's bones, the way sound would move through it, where eyes would drift when they were bored or frightened. We set the screen high enough that no one could stand in front of it without climbing a chair. Gil tested the audio with a song that made the chandeliers shiver. When you nod, he said, the truth plays. On Friday afternoon, A courier delivered a thin envelope to my door. Inside, a single-page quote from a custody specialist with Sutcliffe and Ward's letterhead. The circuit completed. They weren't waiting for me to snap. They were building me. I took a picture and texted it to Mara with no caption. She replied with a thumbs up that somehow felt like a war drum. By night, David was sweetness again. He cooked risotto the way he did on anniversaries and set a glass of wine at my place with exaggerated care. "Tomorrow will be good," he said and smiled. And it was easy to understand how empires fell for men who could smile at the edge of a cliff. I lifted my glass as if we were toasting the same thing. In my pocket, the brooch camera hummed faintly, warm against my thigh. I thought of the first text. Don't react. I had learned that lesson so well my own face felt like porcelain. When I finally lay in bed, the house a dark organism breathing around me, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. You're almost there. Be careful. The partner doesn't lose. The message carried no panic, just a fact thrown like a stone into a pond. I typed back, thumbs steady now. He already has. He just hasn't watched it yet. A minute later, one last reply. Then make him watch. I set the phone face down and closed my eyes. Sleep came like a hand on the back of my head, gentle and inexorable. In my dream, the dining hall filled with people I loved and people who thought love was ownership. I stood at the front in a simple dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back, the way I wore it on days I wanted to be taken seriously. The projector hummed. The first frame held. A room full of watchers. And me, finally, the one deciding what they saw. When morning came, the light through the blinds made crisp ladders on the floor. I stepped through each rung like I was descending into something deep and cold. I kissed Jackson's forehead before Theo's mom picked him up. "Adventure weekend?" I whispered. And he smiled without knowing why. The word made me want to tear the world down and rebuild it kinder. Then I went to meet my own adventure. The kind where you don't slay dragons as much as you hold mirrors to them until they scorch themselves. By 6, the hall smelled like flowers and performance. The tablecloths were white. The napkins folded into things that wanted to be swans. People arrived on time the way guilty people do. Agnes wore black, which she must have thought made her look grave and not like a star in a film about her own downfall. Ethan shook my hand with a grip like apology, and then avoided me as if contrition were contagious. David kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you for doing this." And if there were cameras, that line alone would have won him 2 jurors. I told them all to sit. I let the first course clink against porcelain while small talk grazed like deer on a lawn. I stood at the back and watched the way their shoulders shifted when they laughed. Gil met my eyes from the booth, his hand hovering over the switch. My heart beat not fast but hard, the way a fist hits a table to punctuate a sentence. When the soup bowls had been cleared and the lighting dimmed to flattery, I walked to the front and set my palm on the microphone the way a person puts a hand to a door before opening it. The room quieted with that delicious suddenness you only get when gossip anticipates blood. "Thank you for coming," I said, and my voice sounded like an honest thing in a room allergic to it. I wanted a night of reconciliation. But before we reconcile, we should all look at what we've done. And then I nodded once. The truth began to play. The first image on the screen was so ordinary, it unsettled them more than a scandal might have. It was me, sitting on the living room rug with Jackson in my lap, reading him Charlotte's Web. My voice was soft, the kind of voice you use when you want words to become a lullaby. His small hand traced the illustrations while I turned the pages. The room in the video looked warm, golden, safe. The kind of memory you'd never expect to be weaponized. And then the screen flickered. The audio changed. Agnes's voice filled the hall, low and unmistakable. "She'll destroy herself. We just need to give her a little push." For a moment, no one moved. The words hovered in the chandeliered silence like smoke. Then a few guests shifted in their chairs, glancing at each other, gauging reactions. One of David's uncles chuckled awkwardly, mistaking it for a joke. Another relative cleared his throat too loudly. But I stood still, my palms flat against the microphone, my gaze steady on Agnes. She didn't look at me. She looked at the screen with wide eyes, then darted a glance toward David. He didn't flinch. He just pressed his lips together, his hands tight on the tablecloth. The footage rolled on. Side-by-side edits appeared. On the left, the doctored videos. Me screaming, me slamming a door, me clutching my hair as if unraveling. On the right, the originals. Me speaking quietly on the phone to my therapist. Me crying while holding a farewell letter from my late father. Me closing the bathroom door after Jackson had a nightmare. The edits weren't just deceptive. They were grotesque. Gasps rippled through the room as the contrast became undeniable. Even the most loyal cousins began to whisper. I watched their faces change one by one, as if masks were being peeled away. Agnes slammed her hand against the table so hard the glasses rattled. "You set this up," she screeched, her composure cracked wide open. "This is a trick." Before I could respond, her husband, the man who had sat silent for years, stood up. His voice boomed across the room, cutting through the chaos. "No, Agnes. You set this up." The room froze. He continued, his tone bitter, almost weary. "I bought the first camera, yes. But I never knew you'd go this far. I never knew you were manipulating the child." His eyes burned at her. "You've gone too far, and now everyone sees it." Agnes's face drained of color. She spun toward him, mouth open like a wound, but he stepped back as though her touch might burn. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. I felt the power tilt, the balance shift. For once, it wasn't me defending myself. It was them turning against one another. David jolted from his chair and stormed toward the tech booth, his voice sharp. "Shut it off. Now." But Gil was ready. He simply shook his head and pressed a key. The next clip filled the screen. It was David, sitting in his office with the blinds half drawn, speaking on the phone. His voice was clear, undeniable. "I'll push her until she loses custody. Then we'll get the house and the kid." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Someone dropped a fork. A woman from the family put her hands over her mouth and began to cry. Ethan stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward, then stumbled out of the hall without a word. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The room was doing my work for me. Agnes clawed at the tablecloth, her knuckles white. David stopped halfway to the booth, frozen by his own voice echoing back at him. He turned toward me, his face pale, his mouth working soundlessly like a fish yanked from water. "You ruined everything," he finally spat, his voice raw with disbelief. I met his eyes with calm that felt carved from stone. "I didn't ruin anything, David. I just took off your masks. The rest, you did all by yourselves." The last video played then, projected larger than life. The email thread Lena had given me, with Agnes's instructions highlighted for everyone to see. Phrases to use. "Are you okay? You seem confused. You keep forgetting." Each line was damning, each bullet point a nail in their coffin. Agnes shrieked. "That's private." As if privacy had ever mattered to her. When the lights came back on, the room was divided. Some relatives avoided eye contact, others whispered apologies, and a few walked out in silence, shaking their heads. But the damage was done. I closed the microphone, thanked everyone for coming, and walked out without another glance. Behind me, the silence shattered into murmurs, accusations, and tears. I didn't care. My part was over. Outside, the night air was cold and alive, like it had been waiting for me. I stood by my car and breathed, my chest rising with something I hadn't felt in months, relief. Then my phone buzzed. A new court notification lit up the screen. The judge had approved my emergency petition. Full temporary custody of Jackson, with a complete no-contact order against David and Agnes until the next hearing. I pressed the phone to my chest. My son was safe. But when I got home and stepped into the quiet house, the relief crumbled. On the coffee table sat a plain white envelope. No name, no return address. My stomach knotted as I tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, me asleep in my bed. On the back, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You still don't know what I'm capable of." The paper trembled in my hand. My eyes darted around the room. Every corner felt alive, every shadow a threat. Someone had been in my house. Again. After everything, after the cameras, after the exposure, after the court orders, someone had still gotten through my door. And the war I thought I'd won was only beginning. The photo shook in my hands like it had a pulse. My hair in the picture was fanned across the pillow exactly as it had been the night before. The book beside me, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, still lay on the nightstand in the same position. The sheets were wrinkled the same way. Whoever had taken that picture hadn't just been in my house. They had been standing in my bedroom, I staggered back, every nerve on fire. My gaze darted around the living room, to the lampshades, the bookshelves, the vents. Was I being watched even now? My breathing turned shallow. I wanted to scream, to shatter every object that might hide a lens, but the warning from that first text echoed in my head. Don't react. Instead, I slid the photo into a plastic freezer bag, my hands trembling so badly that I nearly tore the edges. Then I grabbed my phone and called Mara. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped, alert. Don't panic, she said before I could speak. Listen carefully. Bag it. Don't touch it again. And don't stay in the house tonight if you can help it. I already bagged it, I whispered. They were here, Mara. In my bedroom. Watching me sleep. That means they're escalating. And that means they're sloppy. Bring it to the police first thing tomorrow. For tonight, lock every door and window, keep your phone by your bed. And don't be afraid to call 911 if you hear the slightest sound. I wanted to ask her how she expected me to sleep at all, but I bit my tongue. I'd already given these people enough of my fear. That night I turned every lock, checked every window twice, and shoved a chair under the back door handle. Still, I slept with the lights on and a kitchen knife under my pillow. Every creak of the house made me jolt upright, heart pounding. By morning my eyes felt raw, my body trembling from exhaustion. But I had a mission. At the police station, the officer on duty examined the photo with a frown. He bagged it properly, scribbled notes, and asked the usual questions. Had I seen anyone suspicious? Had anything been stolen? Did I have enemies? Enemies. The word almost made me laugh. Yes, I said flatly. And they live in my own family. He promised to open a trespassing and stalking investigation, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I was just another woman with a photo, another woman with a story too twisted for paperwork. I left with no real assurance, but Mara's voice was steady when I updated her. Don't worry about their doubt, she said. We have more than enough evidence already. The restraining order is ironclad. This only adds to the pattern. And Zita, this isn't just harassment anymore. This is criminal. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Criminal. That word sat heavy on my tongue. But if they wanted to break me, they underestimated me. I started living as if I were under siege. Because in truth I had high-grade security cameras installed around the perimeter of the house, each connected to an app on my phone. I added motion sensor lights, reinforced locks, and a smart alarm system linked directly to a central station. My world became passwords and codes, beeps and alerts. Jackson asked why our house now looked like a fortress. I knelt to his level, smoothed his hair and said, "It's just to keep us safe. From the past." He didn't fully understand, but he nodded, trusting me in the way only children can. Still, safety is not peace. 1 week later, my phone rang just after midnight. An unknown number again. I almost didn't answer, but something told me not to let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was low, distorted, metallic. "You're exposing too much," it said. "And we're not the only ones watching now." The line went dead. I sat frozen, phone pressed to my ear long after the call had ended. My blood felt like ice. Not the only ones. What did that mean? How far did this web stretch? The next day, my videos, leaked anonymously online, were gaining traction. What had begun as small uploads with only a few dozen views had exploded overnight. Tens of thousands of people were watching, sharing, commenting. Local news outlets picked up the story, labeling it an example of coercive control and domestic surveillance abuse. Strangers messaged me with support. Other women reached out with their own stories. For a moment, I felt like I had turned the tide. That I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every woman who had been silenced. But then another message arrived. This one from a woman I'd never met. "He did the same to me years ago," she wrote. "Your husband. He recorded me too. No one believed me then. Please, we need to talk." Her name was Claire. We met at a cafe far from prying eyes. She was a few years older than me, with shadows under her eyes that looked permanent. As soon as she sat down, she reached for my hand. "I tried to fight him," she said. "I tried to tell people. But he had help. Connections. A partner at his firm who covered for him, smoothed things over. I dropped the case because I couldn't afford to lose everything." Her story was a mirror of mine. The same tactics, the same isolation, the same threat of being labeled unstable, the partner she named, the same one in Agnes's email thread. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just David and his mother. It was bigger. A system. A machinery that had been protecting men like him for years. When I got home that evening, I pulled out the divorce papers David had once waved in front of me like a warning. The partner's name was everywhere. Contracts, clauses, signatures. He wasn't just a bystander. He was part of the machine. If I wanted to cut off the serpent's head, I'd have to go beyond the family. I'd have to strike at the firm, at the money, at the reputation they worshipped more than truth. The thought didn't terrify me. It steadied me. Because if they wanted war, they would get it. And this time it wouldn't be fought in the shadows. The morning after meeting Claire, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Fear had been my constant companion, creeping into my bones, keeping me on edge with every shadow and whisper. But now the fear had transformed into purpose. I finally understood what I was really up against. Not just David, not just Agnes, but a network that thrived on women's silence. A system polished with power and privilege, one that thought it was untouchable. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every woman they buried under lies. I gathered everything. The videos, the doctored edits, the backpack note, the custody quote, the emails Lena had given me, and now Claire's testimony. I scanned her old documents, the screenshots she had kept, the fragments of evidence she'd clung to even when the world told her to give up. Together, they told a story that was bigger than either of us. A pattern. A deliberate operation of silencing women. When I brought it all to Mara, she didn't blink. She sat across from me, hands folded, listening with the poise of someone who had been waiting for this kind of fight her whole career. "You understand what this means?" she asked. "It means they can't just erase me anymore," I said. "It means they can't erase anyone." She nodded. "And it also means they'll come for you harder than ever. But you're not alone in this. We're not just filing motions now. We're bringing the Bar Association into it. If we prove collusion between your husband's firm and his family's scheme, that partner loses his license. David loses his job. And Agnes, she loses the shield she thinks she has." The idea steadied me like a sword in my hand. Finally, I wasn't just reacting to their traps. I was building my own battlefield. That week was a blur of signatures and statements. Mara filed a new motion, stacked high with claims of defamation, invasion of privacy, coercive control, attempted judicial fraud, and now collusion with a law firm. She submitted Claire's sworn statement alongside mine. The Bar Association agreed to review the case immediately. It was one thing to face me in court. It was another to risk their entire professional empire. But vengeance doesn't arrive without resistance. David's mask of calm began to crack. He came home earlier and earlier, rummaging through drawers when he thought I wasn't looking, his footsteps restless in the middle of the night. One evening, I caught him trying to access my laptop, his reflection betraying him in the window pane. I didn't confront him. I simply let him think he was close, let him feel the thrill of almost catching me, because the closer he thought he was, the less he'd suspect I was already miles ahead. Agnes, meanwhile, was a storm at full tilt. Even with the restraining order, she found ways to make herself felt. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. A smear campaign online accusing me of being unstable, cruel, even abusive to Jackson. Comments piled up under my name, strangers calling me a monster. At first it stung, but then I realized something. The louder their lies became, the more desperate they looked. And still, the anonymous messages continued. "Don't trust anyone today. The walls are thinner than you know. The partner doesn't lose." I didn't know whether they came from friend or foe, but whoever they were, they kept me sharp. Then came the delivery that nearly shattered me. A knock at the door one morning revealed a courier with an envelope. Inside was a signed contract, my house, sold to a woman named Megan Lang. The date was 2 days earlier. David's signature gleamed at the bottom like a knife. He had sold the house. My house. The one I fought for, the one I secured for Jackson and myself. And he had done it before the judge's final ruling, as if I were just an obstacle to clear on his path to a clean slate. For a moment, the betrayal sucked the air from my lungs. I leaned against the wall, clutching the papers, shaking so hard I nearly tore them. But rage is a clarifying fire. Once it burned, I knew exactly what to do. I copied the contract, sent it to Mara, and told her everything. Within hours, she filed a fraud complaint, pointing out the conflict of interest, the timing, the deception. Because the sale wasn't just betrayal, it was illegal. And then I made a decision. The firm's annual charity gala was scheduled for that weekend. Both David and the partner would be there, smiling in suits, giving speeches about family values and community. It would be their stage, their kingdom. I decided it would also be their downfall. With Mara's blessing, I prepared my arsenal. Videos, emails, contracts, Claire's testimony. All condensed into a presentation no one could ignore. I hired Gil again to handle the projection, making sure nothing could be cut or stopped. On the night of the gala, the hall sparkled with chandeliers and the clink of champagne flutes. Lawyers, politicians, donors, all dressed in their finest hypocrisy. David and the partner stood at the podium, their voices dripping with false sincerity as they spoke about justice, family, and trust. And when they finished, I stood. My heart pounded, but my voice was calm as I walked to the stage. "Sorry for the interruption," I said into the microphone, my eyes sweeping across the crowd. "But I think everyone here deserves to see the real legacy of these men." Gasps rippled as Gil cued the screen behind me. Videos, emails, documents. The truth, larger than life, filling the hall. David's voice plotting to take custody and the house. Agnes's email outlining how to provoke me. The doctored videos side by side with the originals. The contract with Megan Lang's name. And finally, Claire's testimony. Her face brave and unshaken as she described how the same tactics had been used on her. The hall erupted in whispers, outrage, disbelief. Some people walked out, others recorded on their phones, the glow of cameras multiplying like fireflies. David lunged toward the tech booth, but security stopped him. The partner paled, hiding his face with his hand. Agnes, though not invited, appeared at the back of the hall, her scream slicing through the noise. "She's lying," but no one believed her anymore. The truth had been spoken, and it echoed louder than their lies ever could. I walked off the stage without looking back. In the parking lot, Mara was waiting. She gripped my arm, her smile sharp with victory. "Congratulations," she said. "You didn't just win. You ended them." The next morning, headlines splashed across the news. Law firm under fire for conspiracy and abuse allegations. Partner suspended. Custody battle shaken by shocking evidence. David lost his job. The partner faced disbarment. Agnes was sued for harassment. And the sale of my house was annulled, tied up in fraud complaints. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But that night, as I sat in the quiet living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. And then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A photo of a house I didn't recognize. The caption, "You won. But you know this never really ends, right?" I stared at the screen, frozen. Because deep down I knew they were right. The message was simple, almost cold in its brevity. "You won. But you know this never really ends, right?" I sat there on the couch, the glow of the phone screen painting my face in pale blue. My heart pounding harder than it had even at the gala. The photo attached to the message showed a modern house on a remote street, half-built, its windows dark, its driveway wet from rain. I didn't recognize the house, but I recognized the tone. It wasn't a threat of rage. It was a statement of fact, a reminder. That was what chilled me most. I showed the message to Mara the next morning. She frowned, tapping the photo. "This is a burner number. Disposable. They're taunting you. We'll add it to the stalking complaint." "That doesn't stop them from showing up again," I said. "No," she admitted, her voice steady. "But every breadcrumb makes the trail clearer. And the more they try to scare you, the more evidence we gather. Don't forget that, Zita. You're not the one hiding anymore. They are." But evidence didn't tuck my son into bed at night. Evidence didn't calm the dread in my stomach when headlights slowed outside my house, or when I heard a creak in the hallway at 2 a.m. That week, I noticed a car parked across the street. A dark sedan, windows tinted too deep, no visible license plate. It sat there for hours. On Sunday it returned. On Monday again. I called the police. They sent a patrol, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. It was a phantom, appearing and vanishing like a test of my nerves. The anxiety was relentless. I couldn't go outside without scanning the street, Couldn't cook dinner without glancing at the windows. Couldn't sleep without the hum of the security system and the glow of cameras blinking reassurance at me. My life had become a siege. But if they wanted to trap me in fear, they underestimated me again. I took action. I upgraded every lock, every alarm. I hired a professional to sweep my house for bugs, and sure enough, he found a tiny blue-lit micro camera hidden inside a lampshade in my bedroom, aimed directly at my bed. My knees gave out when he pulled it out and handed it to me. After everything, after the exposure, after the restraining orders, they had still gotten inside. I called Mara immediately. She contacted the police, who traced the signal from the device to a rental apartment registered under the name Megan Lang. The same name on the fraudulent house contract. The pieces clicked together in my mind, cold and brutal. Megan wasn't just a cover story. She was real. And she had been part of this long before I realized. Armed with the warrant, police raided the apartment. Inside, they found what I can only describe as a shrine of obsession. More cameras, piles of notes, printed photographs of me and Jackson, recordings organized by dates and rooms. A chilling map of my life, catalogued and dissected. Megan was arrested. So was the partner at Sutcliffe and Ward. Once they found financial records tying him to her apartment lease. And David, my husband, the man who had shared my bed for years, was indicted as an accomplice for concealing it all even after the first complaints. The news spread like wildfire. What began as a story about one woman's surveillance nightmare became a national scandal. Headlines screamed about family manipulation, stalking, and legal corruption. My face was everywhere, though I never gave interviews. Other women came forward with stories of harassment and betrayal. People began calling me a survivor, a fighter, a voice for the voiceless. But none of that mattered to me in those first weeks. What mattered was walking into Jackson's room at night, watching him sleep peacefully, knowing that, for once, no one was watching us through a hidden lens. What mattered was hearing him laugh again, freely, without the shadow of fear. We moved soon after, to a smaller town with quiet streets and elderly neighbors who brought us pies and asked nothing in return. I took a new teaching job at a local school. One where the students cared more about passing literature than about gossip. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, with flowers on every windowsill and children riding bicycles until dusk. For the first time in years, peace seemed possible. But peace doesn't erase scars. Some nights when the wind creaked against the shutters, I found myself awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if another camera glowed in the dark. Sometimes when Jackson called for me, my heart stopped before I reached him. As if afraid of what I might find, I began keeping a journal, not just for myself but for him. A record of everything from the first text at Agnes's lunch table to the court rulings, the threats, the photos, the arrests. I wanted him to know the truth one day, not the rumors, not the whispers. I wrote every detail, every scar. And at the end of one entry I scribbled 3 words that became a mantra. It's not over. Because deep down I knew. People like Agnes, like David, like the partner, they didn't just give up. They retreated. They hid. They waited. And I would have to be ready when the shadows moved again. Life in the cul-de-sac was quieter, softer, deceptively safe. Jackson laughed more now, his face unburdened, and my days at the new school felt like therapy in motion. I buried myself in books, in lesson plans, in the slow rhythm of ordinary life. But every night when the house settled into silence, I couldn't ignore it, the nagging thought that all of this wasn't finished. The photo, the cameras, the endless cycle of threats, it wasn't random. It wasn't even just David or Agnes. It was a pattern. And somewhere in that pattern was Megan Lang, the name that kept threading through the story like a ghost shadow. The fraudulent house contract still gnawed at me. Why would David sell our home to her, of all people? Who was she really? A lover? A stranger? A pawn? I couldn't shake it. So one Saturday morning after Jackson went to play with Theo, I sat at my laptop and started digging. I typed Megan Lang into public record searches, into social media platforms, into databases I shouldn't have had access to but did, thanks to old academic connections. At first I found nothing but fragments. Addresses that no longer existed, phone numbers disconnected, a string of jobs under names that didn't seem to last. It was like chasing smoke. But then I stumbled on a deactivated Instagram account. Only one profile photo remained. A black and white snapshot of a young woman, blurred and grainy. Even in low resolution, something inside me stirred. The curve of her jaw, the tilt of her head. She wasn't a stranger. I had seen her before. I closed my eyes, forcing memory to work. And then it hit me. A photo album. Agnes's house. The graduation party years ago. I had seen that same face in an old picture, sitting on David's lap in the basement rec room. Not as a stranger. Not as a guest. But as if she belonged there, as if she'd never left. My blood went cold. Megan wasn't new. She wasn't some recent fling. She had been part of David's life long before me. Woven into the fabric of his family, hidden like a splinter no one wanted to pull out. I searched deeper, tracing aliases, court records, anything tied to her name. And then I found it, an identity fraud case from years ago in another state. She'd been accused of falsifying documents, of using multiple names, of disappearing before sentencing. The case had been quietly dismissed for lack of evidence. I sat back, trembling. It wasn't just David and Agnes. It wasn't even just the partner at the firm. Megan was the invisible piece of a chessboard I hadn't realized I was playing on. She had been waiting, lurking in the shadows of my marriage, slipping in when cracks formed, preparing to claim what she thought was hers all along. I took everything I found to Mara. She skimmed through the documents with the same expression surgeons wear over open wounds, controlled, clinical, but furious beneath the surface. "This changes everything," she said. "The sale of your house wasn't just fraud. It was collusion based on a pre-existing relationship. She wasn't a stranger. She was an accomplice. And this strengthens our entire case." "But why?" I whispered. "Why would she do all this?" Mara leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Because, Zita, some people never let go of the past. And your husband clearly never let go of her." The word stung even though I already knew. We filed a motion to annul the house sale, citing fraud and Megan's hidden ties to David. The court accepted. The house reverted back under judicial review. Megan vanished again, her name disappearing from leases, her accounts deactivated. But her absence didn't bring relief. It brought silence. And silence, I had learned, was its own form of threat. For a few weeks, life seemed to stabilize. Jackson's laughter filled the new house. My students turned in essays about hope and courage, unknowingly teaching me as much as I taught them. The newspapers moved on to other scandals. But I didn't relax. Because then came the voicemail. A block number. 3 seconds long. No words, just the sound of a child's voice saying, "It's her." I froze. It was Jackson's voice. My son's. I replayed it over and over, my hands shaking. The recording wasn't fake. I knew that tone, that pitch, the way his voice lifted at the end of a phrase. But how? How had they captured it? I rushed to check every camera, every microphone, every corner of the house. Nothing. I called the police. They told me it might be fabricated, spliced from other recordings. But I knew better. It was too personal. Too exact. That night I sat in bed, staring at the shadows crawling across the ceiling. And then I saw it. A faint blue glow, barely visible, leaking from the rim of the lampshade. I jumped up, heart racing, and pulled the lamp apart with trembling hands. Inside the metal frame was a micro camera, its eye cold and unblinking, pointed directly at my bed. My knees gave out. They had gotten inside again. I called the police immediately. They confiscated the device and traced the signal. The address was familiar. A rental apartment under Megan Lang's name, paid for by a shell company tied to David's former law partner. The web was intact. This wasn't over. And for the first time I realized it never would be, not until I cut it out at the root. The night they found that camera in my lamp was the night my fear died. Not because I wasn't terrified, I was. But fear had shifted, hardened into something sharper. I wasn't prey anymore. I was the hunter who had finally spotted the tracks. When the police handed Mara the report tracing the microcamera's signal back to Megan Lang's rental apartment, her face was calm but her eyes gleamed with fire. "This is it," she said. "We're not playing defense anymore. We're pressing charges." She moved fast. Within 24 hours she filed formal criminal complaints. Stalking, violation of a restraining order, invasion of privacy, conspiracy, endangerment of a minor. With the new evidence tying Megan to David's partner, the case was no longer just a domestic dispute. It was a full-scale investigation. 2 days later, the warrant was signed. I wasn't there when they kicked in Megan's apartment door, but I wish I had been. I wish I'd seen the look on her face when they found her shrine of obsession. The detectives later described it to me in detail. Walls lined with printed photographs of me and Jackson, dated and labeled. Boxes of microcameras, receipts for disguises, maps of my neighborhood. A binder with Zita written on the front in bold black marker. Inside, transcripts of my phone calls, screenshots of my emails, even drafts of messages she had planned to send from anonymous accounts. It was sick. Beyond sick. But the most damning evidence wasn't the photographs or the cameras. It was the financial trail. Every rent check, every equipment purchase, every false identity Megan used. It all tied back to payments authorized by David's law partner. The same man who had toasted our marriage years ago, smiling like he was blessing the union while secretly plotting my erasure. When Megan was let out in handcuffs, she screamed. Not words of denial or fear, but my name. Zita! She shrieked, thrashing against the officers. You don't belong here. You were never supposed to have this life. Those words chilled me more than anything else, because they revealed the truth. She had never seen me as a woman. To her, I was an intruder. Someone who had stolen a story she believed was hers. The partner was arrested hours later. When the news broke, his firm crumbled overnight. Clients pulled out. Sponsors vanished. His name, once respected, became synonymous with corruption. And David, my husband, the man who once whispered love into my ear, was indicted as an accomplice. The evidence showed he had known about the surveillance long before I discovered it. He had concealed it, enabled it, and profited from it. I watched the footage of his arrest on the evening news. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't protest. He just walked with his head down, hands cuffed behind his back. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, but what I felt was emptier, colder. Like burying a body you once loved. Still, justice had momentum now. The media devoured the story. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the system that had allowed this to happen, the silence that had protected predators in tailored suits. Women began reaching out to me, hundreds of them, with stories of manipulation, gaslighting, covert abuse. Some had fought and lost. Others had given up before they began. But all of them looked at me like I was proof that the war could be won. It was overwhelming, humbling, terrifying. But most of all, it was fuel. Because the fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exposure. When the first court date arrived, I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom with Mara beside me. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward my face. Do you have anything to say, Zita? How does it feel to confront them? Do you see yourself as a hero? I said nothing. Not out of fear. But because silence is power when everyone expects noise. Inside, David sat at the defense table, pale and hollow, his once perfect suit hanging loose on his frame. Megan glared at me with a feral intensity, her hair unkempt, her wrists chained. The partner avoided my gaze entirely, staring down at the table as if the wood grain might save him. When the judge entered, the room hushed. One by one, the charges were read aloud. Each word landed like a drumbeat. Stalking, privacy violation, judicial fraud, child endangerment, conspiracy. I sat still, my hands folded, my face calm. But inside I was screaming. Not with pain, with vindication. When it was my turn to testify, I rose. My voice was steady, my story clear. I described the first text at Agnes's lunch table, the cameras, the doctored videos. The night I found the folder labeled, backup understory, the threats, the notes, the photo of me asleep. I spoke of Jackson, of how they tried to turn him against me, how they weaponized his innocence. At one point, when I said the words they wanted me erased, I heard someone in the gallery gasp. And then I turned toward David. For the first time since all of this began, I let my voice sharpen. You tried to destroy me with silence. But silence is what buried you. Because when the truth finally spoke, it was louder than all of your lies. He didn't look up. By the end of that day, the judge granted me full custody of Jackson, permanent restraining orders against Agnes, and barred David from our home indefinitely. Megan and the partner remained in custody pending trial. It should have felt like the end. But that night when I tucked Jackson into bed, I noticed something. The stuffed fox he always slept with, his favorite toy, the one that had followed him since toddlerhood, was sitting in the corner of the room. He hadn't moved it. I hadn't moved it. Someone had. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside the stitching, something hard pressed against the fabric. I tore it open with shaking fingers. A listening device. Small. Sophisticated. Still blinking red. My victory in court was real. But the war in the shadows was not over. Not yet. I stared at the tiny blinking light buried in Jackson's stuffed fox. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt my stomach twist with the kind of dread that isn't sharp but hollow. A bottomless pit opening inside me. They were still watching. Even after the arrests, the evidence, the judge's rulings, they were still here. I clutched the toy to my chest and sat down on the floor of Jackson's room. My son stirred under the covers, half asleep. "Mom," he whispered drowsily. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, smoothing his hair. My voice came out calm, though my heart was pounding like a trapped bird. "Go back to sleep. I'll take care of it." And I meant it. I wasn't the same woman who once cried in the dark, terrified and broken. I had already fought too far, already torn open the machinery of their lies. This wasn't going to break me. Not now. I slipped the device into my pocket and kissed Jackson's forehead. As soon as his breathing slowed back into the rhythm of sleep, I left the room and shut the door quietly behind me. Mara was at my kitchen table, still awake, typing on her laptop. She looked up the moment she saw my face. "What happened?" I set the torn open fox on the table and dropped the tiny recorder beside it. Its red light blinked like a heartbeat. Her eyes widened. "Oh hell. They planted this in my son's toy," I said, my voice low but razor sharp. "Even with Megan in custody. Even with David behind bars." For a long moment Mara just stared at it. Then she leaned back in her chair and exhaled. "That means two things. Either Megan had help we haven't identified yet, or someone else entirely has decided to continue the job." I sat down across from her, the fury inside me simmering into something steady and lethal. "Then we find them. We end this." The next morning I called Detective Singh, the lead investigator who had raided Megan's apartment. His voice over the phone was grim when I explained what I'd found. "Don't touch it anymore. I'll send a tech team to sweep the entire house. If one device is here, there could be more." He wasn't wrong. By noon, technicians were combing through every corner of my home. They found 2 additional devices, one hidden in the smoke detector of the hallway, another inside the base of my nightstand lamp. Each one high-tech, military-grade, the kind of equipment no civilian should have easy access to. I asked Singh the question that burned in me. If Megan's in custody and the partners locked up, then who? He hesitated before answering. "We're looking at possibilities. People connected to the firm. Old clients. Even private investigators who might have been subcontracted. But one thing's clear. This isn't just obsession anymore. It's a network. And someone still has a stake in destroying you." The words hit me like ice water. A network. This wasn't about one unhinged woman. Or even a bitter ex-husband. This was bigger. Organized. And the more I thought about it, the more the pieces aligned. The ease with which they hacked into my emails, the precision of the surveillance, the way Megan always seemed 2 steps ahead. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a campaign. Mara, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. "Zita, you need to understand something. Networks like this don't back down because of a court ruling. They double down. They want to break you publicly. If they can't ruin you legally, they'll ruin your reputation, your livelihood, maybe even your safety." I met her eyes steady. "Then we don't wait for the next attack. We take the fight to them." The next week was a blur of strategy. Mara pulled every legal string she had, contacting federal prosecutors who specialized in organized crime. Singh coordinated with cybercrime units to trace the origins of the devices. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything, every note, every camera, every shred of evidence. I wanted a record not just for court but for the world. Because deep down I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. One night, while Jackson was at a sleepover with a trusted friend, I sat alone in my living room with stacks of papers around me. My hands shook as I flipped through the photographs Megan had taped to her walls. Each one of me, frozen in ordinary moments, shopping, dropping Jackson off at school, sitting in my own kitchen. First they had horrified me. Now they fueled me. Every picture was proof of their failure. Proof that no matter how much they watched me, they had not erased me. I was still here. Breathing. Fighting. Speaking. And I intended to keep speaking until their empire of silence collapsed. The breakthrough came when one of Singh's tech experts traced a signal from one of the listening devices. It didn't lead back to Megan or the partner. It led to a private security firm operating out of the city, one known for off-the-books contracts. When Singh showed me the report, I felt my throat go dry. The company's board of directors included names I recognized. Two of David's wealthiest clients, men whose fortunes had been tied up in questionable real estate and lobbying deals. Suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. David and his partners had used Megan as a weapon, but the people funding her wanted something else entirely. They wanted leverage. To silence me before I could expose the connections I'd started piecing together. The way money flowed through David's firm, the way it funded illegal surveillance, maybe even worse. And they were still trying to silence me now. Mara was the one who said it aloud. Zita, you've become a liability to them. Which means you've already won half the battle. The only thing left is to make their fear public. Her words echoed in me. For years, silence had been my prison. Now it was their weapon turning against them. The first time I agreed to an interview, it was with a local journalist known for exposing corruption. My hands trembled when the cameras switched on, but my voice didn't falter. I told my story, every detail. From the first poison whisper to the blinking red light inside my son's toy. And when the reporter asked me why I was going public now, I said the words that had been burning in my chest. Because they tried to erase me. And the best way to fight erasure is to take up space. To be louder than their lies. The interview went viral within hours. Suddenly, I wasn't just Zita, the victim of a vindictive husband and his unhinged mistress. I was Zita, the woman who had dragged a conspiracy into the light. The woman who had chosen voice over silence. But with the spotlight came new danger. The next morning, a brick crashed through my window, shattering glass across my living room floor. Attached to it was a note scrawled in black marker. Stop talking or your son is next. I picked it up with shaking hands. And then slowly I smiled. Because threats only come when truth hits too close. And mine had just drawn blood. I swept the glass from the floor with slow, careful strokes, the way you brush dust from a page you're not ready to close. The brick sat on the counter wrapped in a kitchen towel. Its scrawled message bleeding through. Stop talking or your son is next. I photographed everything, the shattered pane, the brick, the note, the way the night air looked guilty coming through the torn window screen. Then I called Detective Singh. Then Mara. Then Theo's mother to ask if Jackson could sleep over one more night. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not post a single word. I did what terrifies men who weaponize silence. I documented and I planned. By morning, the footage from my doorbell camera gave us a silhouette. Ball cap, hoodie, gloved hands. The car that idled at the curb was the same dark sedan I'd seen on our old street. Clear plates this time. Registered to a shell company that, on paper, specialized in asset protection. Singh's tech traced the company back to the private security firm he'd flagged in his report. I watched the screen over his shoulder as arrows connected names to LLCs to donations to Sutcliffe and Ward's Gala Fund. It looked like a family tree of rot. They're laundering intimidation through corporate veil, Singh said, voice flat with disgust. We're escalating. Organized conspiracy. RICO. I asked softly, the word tasting like something you whisper in a church. Working toward it, he said. We'll need coordination with the AG's office. Your case is the spine. Don't stop talking. I nodded. A small inventory of the people who had told me to be quiet flickering through my mind like the opening credits to the life I no longer lived. Don't make this harder. You're so fragile. We're recording you. I wasn't quiet now. But I also wouldn't be baited into shouting in the dark. I want to go public, I told Mara that afternoon, sitting in her office with the brick on her desk like an art piece from a war. Fully public. Not just an interview. A release. Every document. Every video. Raw, time-stamped, context-labeled. Mirrored in a dozen places with a dead man's switch if anything happens to me. Mara looked at me for a long beat. You're sure? I'm done letting them write me. I exhaled, the decision landing in my bones like a key in a lock. I'll be my own archive. We built it in 2 days, a living dossier. Gil hardened the servers, redundant and mirrored. Claire helped redact what needed redacting. Singh advised what not to compromise in the ongoing investigation. I recorded a single, uncut preface at my kitchen table. No makeup, my hair pulled back, the brick on the counter behind me because I wanted people to see the cost. I described what we were releasing and why, and then I said the sentence that had been ringing in me since the first text at Agnes's lunch table. You tried to erase me, and the opposite of erasure is presence. So here I am. We scheduled the release for Friday at noon, and told no one who didn't need to know. Thursday night, I sat on the edge of Jackson's borrowed bed at Theo's house and read him Charlotte's Web again. He was heavier on my shoulder now, a taller boy in a safer world, and when he fell asleep, his mouth open on a soft breath, I pressed my lips to his hair and promised the kind of promise you make once and then spend your life keeping. I will give you a mother who is not afraid. Friday came clean and bright. I pressed publish and the world arrived like a tide. For hours I watched the download counter climb the way you watch a fever break. Law students annotated the filings on forums. Journalists stitched timelines. Survivors messaged to say, "Thank you for making the shape of what happened to me." A donor list surfaced from the security firm, and with it, old cases that smelled like mine. Women discredited, narratives finessed, fathers praised for stability, while money ghosted the ledger lines. At 3 p.m., the Attorney General held a press conference that said nothing and everything. We are investigating a pattern of organized intimidation and unlawful surveillance. My name wasn't spoken. Didn't need to be. That night the network panicked. Anonymous accounts spammed lies that wilted under the light of receipts. A character witness posted a decade-old photo of me crying, not realizing it already lived in my archive next to the farewell letter from my father. Someone tried to DDoS the site. Gil had planned for 10 of those. The site didn't blink. The first arrest connected to the brick came on Monday. The hired hand folded in an hour. He named a subcontractor at the security firm. The subcontractor named a board member. The board member named donors and the partner again as the original conduit. None of it surprised me. Corruption never is a plot twist, it's a genre. But when Singh called to say, "We have enough for the indictments," I sat on my porch steps and let the early evening wind dry the tears I hadn't had time to shed. David tried to call me from jail 2 days later. I didn't take it. His lawyer sent a letter instead, smooth with euphemism. My client expresses remorse for the distress caused. I slid it under my refrigerator magnet shaped like a lighthouse, a reminder that apologies made from lifeboats don't rebuild ships they sank on purpose. The grand jury returned indictments in June. RICO, conspiracy, wire fraud, unlawful surveillance, witness intimidation. The security firm shut its doors. Their donors deleted BIOS. Sutcliffe and Ward scrubbed press releases and settled with 3 women who came forward after Claire. The partner was disbarred, then booked. He looked smaller in the arraignment photo, as if taking off a tie can steal a person's myth. Agnes pled to misdemeanor vandalism and violation of a protection order. The felony counts slid off where the law is still too kind to women with pearls. The judge ordered mandatory counseling and a 5-year no-contact order with Jackson or me. She stared at me in the hallway like a mirror she wanted to smash. I nodded once and walked past her without giving her my eyes. The last thing I ever gave that family was my attention. Megan fought. She stood up in court and told the world she had been protecting a child from a dangerous mother. She said the cameras were documentation. The stalking vigilance. Her lawyer tried to turn my dossier into an exhibit of narcissism. Look how much she wants to be seen. But the jury watched the side-by-sides, heard the children's therapist testify that Jackson was thriving, and listened to the soft, sorrowed voices of 3 other women Megan had helped document into ghosts. The verdict took less than a day. Guilty on all counts. I didn't celebrate. I breathed. David took a deal. 2 years for conspiracy and privacy violations with 3 years probation and lifetime supervised visitation, if that. The judge read my victim impact statement aloud with the kind of care usually reserved for prayer. He tried to turn silence into a weapon. I turned it into evidence. When they led David away, he looked back only once. Not at me. At the door. as if he might will it open by memory. When the sentencing was over, I went home, opened the thick envelope from the trust one had kept folded in the dark corner of my life, and did what the younger me would have called betrayal of principle and the older me finally knew was stewardship. I used it. I told no one when we married that my late father's union had elected me trustee on a fund he built with the severance he fought a decade to win for men who spent their lungs in the mills. I had never touched it because I wanted my marriage to be a proof of love that required no leverage. I was wrong about where leverage belongs. It doesn't cheapen love. Keeps abusers from cheapening you. I endowed a clinic at Mars firm that would take coercive control cases pro bono. I built a grant called the Loud File to help women pay for forensic sweeps, secure storage, and the kind of AV wizardry Gil gave me because truth deserves good hardware. I set aside a scholarship for my students who write like the world is fixable, because maybe they'll be the ones who do it. When Jackson came home from school that afternoon, we built a birdhouse on the porch. He held nails with solemn concentration. I steadied the roof. We could paint it blue, he decided, so the birds know it's sky. I looked at his face, open and unshadowed, and thought of all the ways a child learns what love is. We painted it sky. Summer feathered into the edges of our days. I slept through a night without waking to listen for a lens. I hung wind chimes. I cooked without checking the window every 5 minutes. I bought a second-hand piano and taught myself to play one song badly until the badness made me laugh. I did not give interviews. I didn't need to. The archive lived. The cases moved. The women found us. Months later, on an ordinary Tuesday that smelled like rain and basil, a letter arrived with no return address, typed, not handwritten. I opened it on the porch steps, hip against the railing, wind in my hair. You won because you wrote it down. That was all. No threat. No signature. A sentence like a verdict and a benediction, arriving from nowhere and everywhere at once. Maybe it was from someone inside who had finally stepped outside. Maybe it was from a woman I would never meet. Maybe it was from me sent backward through time. I held the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. Mom! Jackson called from the kitchen. Can I have another slice of toast? 2. I said, smiling, and walked back into a house that was mine. I set the letter in the drawer with my passports and the spare keys, next to a folded copy of the first text I ever got in this war. Don't react. They're recording you. I left it there as a relic and a reminder. Not of fear. Of instruction. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a world that wants to narrate you wrong is refuse to perform exactly the lie they need. And then gather the truth and let it sing. Because in the end, that's what saved me. Not the rage, though rage gave me legs. Not the law, though law gave me teeth. It was the meticulousness. The way a literature teacher learns to see subtext, then refuses to be buried under it. It was the stubborn insistence on being present, on taking up space with the uncontested facts of my life. It was simply this. I wrote it down. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Silence is the cage. Documentation is the key. When someone tries to script your downfall, keep the receipts, keep your center, and keep going. There will be days when you are terrified, and days when you feel made of iron. Walk through both. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to Revenge Echoes, share it with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments. What truth are you ready to write down today? Your voice might be the light someone else needs.